I read 8 books in the month of January, so let's talk about all of these. In no particular order, we are going to start with Yumi and the Nightmare Painter by Brandon Sanderson. This was recommended to me by my subscribers because I've been reading a lot of Brandon Sanderson and I kept on saying, Brandon Sanderson's amazing, I love his books, I love the way he writes, but he needs more romance. People had said, well, you gotta check out Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. And I did, and I really liked it. I think I ended up giving this book about 4.5 stars. It was really, really fun, and it reminded me of one of my favorite movies of all time, Your Name. And it was just such a good time because, like, we have our main characters, Yumi and Painter, and they come from 2 different worlds. Yumi, she's basically like an ambassador for spirits, I guess is the best way to put it. And what she does is she constantly is like meditating and praying, and she never gets time to do anything that she actually wants to do. And it makes her feel guilty because she's like, you know, like, this is an honor, like, I am here to help talk to the spirits and help the people of these different towns that she visits. And so she's constantly kind of fighting that battle where she's like, I should be grateful of this life that I have. And then on Painter's end, he's not very good at communication. And so there's some stuff that happened to him that now he's kind of like a lone painter. And a painter sounds exactly what you think, because this world thrives on creativity. And so the painter's job is to stop the nightmares. And nightmares are pretty much just like these nebulous, black, gooey little things that kind of come into Painter's world. And Painter, what he does is he literally paints, and that kind of helps change the monster into something not deadly. And so I really love the creativity aspect. And then similarly in Yumi's world, she stacks rocks in like very creative, artistic ways. And the way that she does this, and like as soon as she starts to stack a lot of them, it makes the spirits interested, and they kind of show up and they take a look. And the more she gathers, the more kind of like wishes per se that you can give to the villagers. And so villagers will ask for stuff. And so it's a really well thought out world, and in typical Brandon Sanderson style, he definitely puts you in through a couple of like mind-blowing parts, like you get the wool pulled over your eyes, like there's like so much to it. And it was really, really fun because it's a romance between these 2 characters and how different they are and how they kind of come together. There's some really good trauma bonding, like it's just a beautiful book. I really enjoyed this. Next up, we have Onyx Storm by Rebecca Yarros. This is the 3rd book in the Imperium series. I was fortunate to go to the midnight release, so I got this cool deluxe version, which is like very fancy and it makes me feel really cool. And this was such a good book. I gave it 5 stars. Honestly, this was so good. To me, this series is getting better and better. I enjoyed Fourth Wind. I really enjoyed Iron Flame, and I really enjoyed Onyx Storm. I love that the series is going in its own direction, and like the politics and the dragons and the romance. The romance between these 2 characters is so delicious. So good, so good. You got, like, if you love Shadow Daddies, like, you get a really, really good one in this. Like, the way that the way that they just talk to each other, and like, even like through their bond and like through their minds and stuff, it's amazing. But it's not just the amazing romance in this book, it's also just like the dragons and the world building. And I don't want to spoil anything for you if you haven't read the first 2 books, but I would say this one is really, really good. Like I said, I gave it 5 stars. The way that it ended, and the way that Rebecca Yarros will just kill off the characters without you being like, like she pulls like a George R.R. Martin, to be honest, and a Brandon Sanderson. It hurts, like it really does hurt, and I really love that because you don't know which characters are going to be safe and what's going to happen, and I'm still thinking about that ending. Yeah, it's really good. If you like dragons, if you like romantasy, some good spice and stuff, yeah, this was really good. And I thought that it was just like such a great compliment to the series that is supposed to be 5 books, I believe. So this being the 3rd, I thought was really good because you got to really understand more of the world outside of where the characters always are. And the characters are still doing their kind of like dragon training college stuff too. So it keeps all the really great essences that everybody loves in the first 2 books, while also expanding you more to different dragons, different parts of the world, the politics and stuff. And so yeah, it was a good time. Definitely recommend it. Next up, we have North is the Night by Emily Rath. I bought this book because it's absolutely gorgeous, even under the dust cover, which I'm not going to show you because I have a video where I take the dust cover off and talk about this book. So if you want to see the pretty design underneath, go check that video out. But This book, I purposely gave myself low expectations because of just how beautiful it is, and I didn't want to judge a book by its cover and be like, oh, this is gonna be the most amazing book. But I was pleasantly surprised about how much I actually really enjoyed this book. It's a romantasy book weaved in with Finnish folklore. So you get the shamanism and the paganism and the Christianity focus as well. I will say though that depending on where your kind of religious or spiritual beliefs are, I do want to note that the Christians are the bad guys in this book. So if that's something that makes you uncomfortable, maybe not check it out. But otherwise, I think that this book was really, really good. It has a female-female romance, which we love. We love that. I love seeing that. And it follows along these two best friends. And basically what happens is one of them ends up getting taken to the underworld and is pretty much like a slave for this goddess of death. And this goddess of death had been stealing young women this entire time, like young mortal women. And so the other character is like, oh my goodness, like her name is Siri. And she's like, oh my goodness, like I need to go save my friend. And at this time, people are starting to reject the old gods and are starting more to embrace Christianity. And we know like nowadays, like the way that Finland is now. So this is way before all of that. And so this is like Siri's trying to tell people like, hey, she got stolen by this goddess of death. And they're like, that didn't happen because these gods don't exist. These goddesses don't exist. And she's like, no, but they do. And they're like, no. And so nobody believes her. And so she sets out on her own quest to find a way into the underworld. And the way to do that is she knows, based on the stories that she'd been told growing up, that there is this one shaman who was able to get into the underworld and back, but then he disappeared. And nobody knows what happened to him. He's purposely been lost. And so her journey is to find him and learn from him on how she can get to the underworld. And then on the other side with her friend who is in the underworld, her name is Anya, and she is in the underworld and she's very sweet and timid and stuff, but her character growth going through these horrible things and having to make really difficult decisions really, really shines through this book. Honestly, Anya stole the story, in my opinion, with her journey and a bit of the romance that happens and just trying to figure out like, who is she actually? And what is the true Anya, and like, how can she live and survive in this really difficult environment? While on the flip side, Siri's story was still good, but I found it a little bit slow at times because she was journeying just with herself, or at times there was a bear there, but the bear didn't really talk to her. So I found her story a little bit slow because we're just following her walking around pretty much. But once she gets to one of her main destinations and starts to learn more about like shamanism and stuff, that's where her story really starts to shine. And then just like the conclusion of this book, I thought was really, really good. And I'm really excited for the second one because this is gonna be a duology or a duet, which I've noticed that people are saying duet now, but usually we used to say duology, so let me know if that's like a new better way that people have been referring to it, because I'm not entirely sure. I've seen it both ways now. But yeah, it was really well done. I loved the way that the folklore was weaved in. I learned so much more about like the Finnish gods and stuff and the goddesses, although I cannot pronounce like 90% of the names in this book. Like, you think that the fantasy names in some books you read are really hard? Try Finnish fantasy names. That I couldn't even try to pronounce it without just like, my tongue just does not work. So yeah, it was really cool. I really loved like the winter setting and the magic and the romance and all of this and the character growth. It was honestly the character growth that made this book shine so much. And then it was just like a really good time. I was just really surprised. I think I ended up giving it 4 stars because Siri's story, like I mentioned, was a little bit slow for me. But when it came to Anya's story, absolutely phenomenal, beautiful, and I'm really excited for whenever the second book will come out. Next up, we have Heartless Hunter by Kristen Ciccarelli. This book is like a witch hunter book done right. I personally didn't really enjoy Serpent and Dove. It just didn't do it for me, but this one did it well. We have our 2 main characters. We have Rune, who is a secret witch, and nobody knows that because she had actually condemned her family to death, but she didn't want to, but she had to because like that was the only way, like, and it was like her nan who convinced her like this is the best choice to make to protect herself. And so she did that, and she then later discovered that she's actually a witch. So nobody knows that she is a witch except for like her and like some really close friends. And so she kind of puts on this like socialite, kind of ditzy little girl vibe in front of everybody in this kind of world. And this is during like the Regency period. And in this area, she's also like a vigilante, the Crimson Moth. And she has been going out and basically been saving witches who've been condemned to die. And so it's really, really cool the way that her story is, because we get to see her actually who she is, and then like the fake persona she has to put on in front of the entire like court and the people and all of this stuff. So then on the flip side, we have Gideon, and he's like the captain of these witch hunter people. And he doesn't like witches because he had this really bad experience with them, and they had basically, in a way, kidnapped him and his family and forced them to work with them, and some bad stuff happened. So he has a very valid reason to not like witches and not trust them at all. And so he's a witch hunter. And so he's been trying to find the Crimson Moth, and he kind of learns through his informants that Rune, who owns these kind of like ships that do ship stuff, there had been a witch kind of like discovered stowed away on there. And so he's like, interested, like maybe she's involved, maybe she's not. And so they're enemies, and they start to fake date because they both are trying to get information from each other. He's trying to figure out, is she actually a witch, or is she completely unaware of what her ships are being used for? And she's like, okay, I need to throw him off this trail and also like try to get information, because he's the only one who knows where this really important witch is that she's been trying to track down and find. And so it's really, really fun to watch them because they're enemies to lovers, fake dating, all those vibes that I love. And they're just like, the characters are so good and they're so real, and it has some trauma bonded, which I'm such a big fan of trauma bonded. And it's just like so cool to be able to see these characters actually be themselves, slowly come out of their shells, and it's so good. And I really just had a good time, and I'm just really excited for the second book. This book is definitely worth the hype. I really, really enjoyed it. Next up, we have The 10,000 Doors of January by Alix E. Harrow. I really like this author because the way that she writes is really like gothic, Victorian kind of style, while also like having these endnotes that it feels like it's an academic story, but also not at the same time. I feel like it's really hard to explain. The Emily Wilde books do that too, which I really love. And so in this book, we follow our main character, January. And I think I ended up giving this book 4 stars or 3.5 stars, because I thought at first that this was more like a time travel kind of like go inside of books and live those stories kind of thing. But it wasn't, but I still enjoyed it, because what it is, it follows our character January, and she's mixed race, and this is during like the late 1800s time, and she was pretty much like, in a way, adopted by this really rich like white guy, and her dad is always off doing this archaeology stuff, and so she lives with this guy and all his other rich friends and stuff, and so she's raised like kind of like his daughter. And so people are like, oh yeah, like she's like this unique specimen kind of thing, like they're really racist to her, but she doesn't really realize it kind of thing. But she's also treated as like a privileged kind of like higher class woman, I guess is the best way to put it. It does a really good way in handling these kind of like race issues that happen during that time period as well. And so with her, she ends up finding like this door when she's a kid, and then like stuff happens and the door's burned down basically. And she's always told she has to be this good girl, she has to be quiet, like sit, look pretty kind of stuff. And so she's like that for a very long time. But then when a traumatic thing happens to her later on, she ends up kind of getting thrown on this journey where she has this book called The Book of Doors, and it's telling this story about these people who have discovered different doors throughout the world. And so it's written like an academic book inside of this book. I feel like this is one of those books that's really hard to explain. And so she's like, oh, okay, maybe doors are real, and she's like trying to find these doors and stuff. And there's like a society of people who are like closing all the doors, and like the doors do lead to different realms and stuff. So then we kind of follow her adventures as she and like some companions and stuff are trying to find certain people through different doors and stuff. And I just thought it was really well done. I was surprised at how like deep and emotional that the book does get, and it was really like, it was a good time. I did enjoy it a lot. I just didn't expect this book. I expected it to be like I mentioned, more of like a haha, let's go on a fun little time travel adventure, like maybe go through books and live those stories out. But that wasn't the case, but instead we got something really real, something really raw, and something really interesting that I don't think I've ever really read before. So yeah, if that sounds interesting, definitely check this book out. Next up, we have An Ember in the Ashes by Sabba Tahir. This book came out, I guess like 10 or 11 years ago, and I never heard about it, which is kind of weird. But yeah, I wanted to read it because I really love the kind of like child soldier kind of vibe. And so we have two main characters in this book. We have Leia, who is pretty much a slave. She watches, like, her brother is basically arrested for treason and she tries to run away, and then she ends up making a deal with this rebellion that brings her to this military academy where she is a slave because she's basically trying to gather intel to give back to the rebellion so they can help free her brother. And so that's kind of like her story, and she is a very interesting character because she starts off very timid, very nervous, very like insecure and cowardly. And I think that that's like, it's a nice refreshing kind of thing to see in a book and in a main character, and watch as she grows and develops as the story progresses. And then we also have Elias, and he is like the kind of like a child soldier in this military where a bunch of like specialized kids were taken and were raised and brought up in this military environment. So it's graduation day for him. So he's no longer like a child, but he's still like a teenager. And he is what they call a mask, which is basically just like the big important soldiers, and they wear masks, but unlike all the other soldiers, his mask never like melded into his face, so he can actually take it off, and people are like, kind of suspicious, but he's like one of the top soldiers. And so some stuff happens, and there's basically these trials to become emperor that start to happen. And so him and his other kind of like chosen soldier friends start to endure all of these different trials. And then Leia on her end is basically just trying to find ways to get information about the military academy, the people in charge, how to get in and out, like this kind of stuff. And it's really cool, just like the different kind of dynamic, and then like how the characters kind of come together and talk and meet and stuff, and then like where the rest of the story ends up going. Because there are moments where I was like, oh, like yeah, this is gonna happen, but it doesn't happen. I'm like, oh, okay, cool, like I like that. It's a bit of a surprise. Every single chapter always ends on a cliffhanger. You're always really like, whoa, what's gonna happen next kind of stuff. The only thing, and the only reason I gave it 4 stars instead of like 4.5 or 5, is that I was really expecting more focus on the children military aspect, because that's something I'm really interested in, because my own book that I've written that I'm in the process of querying and getting an agent and all that really cool, exciting stuff is about children soldiers, and it focuses on the children soldiers more. But this book, the children soldier thing, has already really happened. This is the aftermath of that. They're already trained, they already went through all that trauma and drama and stuff. So that was the only thing I was kind of like, oh, like I really wanted that. But I am really happy the way that this book went, and like the magic and kind of the really interesting direction that it did take. So I'm definitely gonna be reading the rest of these books in this series as well. Next up, we have Kaikeyi by Vaishnavi Patel. This book was really interesting to me because I'd never heard the story of Kaikeyi. I never knew about Ramayana or anything like that. One of my big 2025 goals is to read more books written by people of color. And so this book I was really excited about because I've never really heard anything about this character. I don't really know anything, so I thought that it was really fun. It's basically a feminist retelling of the character Kaikeyi. And in Hinduism, Kaikeyi has always been painted as this villainous queen because she banishes her son. And so this story kind of tells her story from a different perspective about like, why did she do that? And so the first part of this book is really good because you get her childhood, her friendship with her twin brother, her other brothers, her relationship with her dad, all of this stuff, how she learns to ride and drive a chariot, which is really important to her story in Ramayana. And then it kind of follows along like with her marriage to this guy where she has like some, like she's the third wife, and like all of this stuff was super, super well done. The only thing is that I found that middle portion was really, really slow for me. It didn't really seem like it knew really where it wanted to go. I think it could have skipped that part and just gone straight to like that end portion, because it really, I was like, okay, what's the story? Like, where are we going? Like, what are the stakes of the story? Like, I wasn't too invested in that part, but then the last part was really, really good. So I did only end up giving this 3.5 stars because of that, but the story itself I thought was just like super interesting, and learning about like the culture and the characters and where the original story came from kind of stuff, I thought was really cool. And being able to see like this character who has been known as a villain and kind of paint the other side. Like, is she actually a villain? Like, this could have been like what actually happened to her. There was also like a magical element too, where she could see like these bonds that she has with other people, and she can kind of like tug on them to kind of get them to agree with her a little bit more, but she has to like build the bonds, make them a lot stronger before she can start to tug too much, or she'll absolutely destroy the bond. So there was a cool magical element to this. I wish that it was touched on a little bit more though, but overall I still thought the book was a really interesting read, and I do definitely recommend it. Just the middle is a little bit slow. And last but certainly not least, we have A Killin' Cold by Kate Alice Marshall. This is a psychological thriller book set in the wintertime with cabins and stuff, and it's a really short read, and I really liked it because it was the perfect length for a thriller. And there's like, you got an unreliable narrator because our main character, Theo, she does not remember the first 4 years of her life, and so she ends up like, you know, going through life and stuff. She ends up dating this guy who she realizes later on is like super rich, and so she's kind of worried because she's like, oh, you know, like I'm gonna meet the family and they probably just think I'm dating you for your money kind of stuff, because she's really poor. And so she really wants the family to love her. Because of the way she grew up, she always tries to become somebody for other people to love, and so that's a really big theme with this character. And so before she goes to her fiance Connor's kind of like cabins with his family and stuff, she starts to get these text messages telling her like, stay away from Connor, like don't go to the cabins, don't do it, like this kind of stuff. And so she ignores it because she's like, what the heck, like that's super weird. And so she goes there and she starts to feel like there's something a little bit familiar about the area. And so she meets the family and stuff. Then there's very big wealthy family, and wealthy families have big secrets, and I'm such a sucker for that kind of thing where it's just like wealthy family secrets and like trying to uncover all of the secrets and stuff. And so as she's there, she's slowly starting to get memories from the first 4 years of her life, and she's like, I think I've been here. And then she finds a photo of herself in one of the cabins, and she's like, whoa, okay, what is going on? Like, how was I here before? And so what I like about the unreliable aspect is that because her memories are so fragmented, it's really hard for her to try to figure out like what is true and what is just like whatever she's trying to like fill the gaps in with. And I think that that's really cool. And then there's like all these really deep, dark family secrets, and she's trying to get information, but she's also like scared, and she doesn't know who to trust. And at one point you're like, you don't trust this one character, but then suddenly you do, and then you don't trust this character, then you do, but then you don't, and it's like, oh, what's gonna go on? It really just puts you in for a whirlwind, and it's such a good time. I really enjoyed this book. It's my perfect length for a thriller. It has such a good winter setting. It's perfect to read in the cold months like right now in January. Such a good time. I really like this book. I gave it 4.5 stars. And so those are all 8 books that I read in the month of January. The year is off to a really good start. I enjoyed all of these books that I read. I found some really good ones, some 5 stars, some 4.5, like some 3.5. Like, I did not have a bad book month, which I'm really happy about. And yeah, I just discovered so many really good reads. So if you're interested in these types of books within these types of genres and stuff, these are the books that I tend to read. I do tend to read like the occasional romance as well, but for whatever reason I didn't this month. I just kind of had like a romantasy. But yeah, I usually read like at least one romance book, like romance book. But yeah, aside from that not being in this list, these are the types of books that I do read. So if you're interested in looking for book recommendations, or you enjoy watching people read these types of books, I do have videos about every single one of these books where I go more in depth about the books and my thoughts as I'm reading those books. So if you haven't already, definitely check those out. And if you enjoyed this video, definitely hit the like button. And if you haven't already as well, definitely hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell notification. That way you get notified anytime a new video comes out. I'm also a YouTube partner, so that means that you can become a member of the I'm Talking Waffles channel, which is pretty cool. So that means you get special member privileges like cool emojis and priority access to stuff and other really cool things. So definitely consider that. I have all the information in the description about how to become a member, and all proceeds of memberships will go towards me buying more books that we can read together, as well as like you can recommend me books and I can buy them and review them on this channel, which is pretty cool. So yeah, thank you so much, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!